Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and today I want to talk about my all-time favourite classic novels. I really dislike making lists of favourites, but at the same time I really like watching other people's lists of favourites. So I thought I'd get over myself and write up a list of classics that I love. This video is going to contain a lot of gushing and not much critical analysis, so be prepared. These are also mostly very obvious classics, all a bit mainstream, so if you're on the lookout for hidden gems, you might be disappointed. All of the items on this list fulfill three criteria. First, they're a classic based on my personal definition of the word, which reads like this. A classic, according to Claudia, is any book that was written and/or published before 1960. Second, they are books that I love, obviously, and gave either 4 or 5 stars to. And third, they are books that I have read more than once. This third point excludes quite a lot of classics that I have recently discovered and really enjoyed. So I'm going to, at some point, make a separate video about recent favourite classics. But this video is about those books that I pick up over and over again, books that have been with me for years, comfort reads if you like, books that have stayed with me, books that I know I'll love on the next reread as much as I did on the last. There are 7 novels on this list and I've decided to put them in chronological order of publication, just because. Number 1. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This book makes me happy every time I read it. I really think this is Jane Austen's masterpiece. It is so beautifully crafted and the story has a universal appeal. We all know the romance of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, but Pride and Prejudice is so much more than that. At its core, it's about a family made up of very different people and their dealings with society, money and love. The main character, Elizabeth Bennet, is a wonderful heroine. She's funny and smart and very opinionated, which is definitely her biggest weakness. She's also quite selfish at times and has somewhat of a disregard for her family when she's asked to compromise her own happiness for their sake. She is just one example of a wonderfully three-dimensional character in this book, because there are so many. Just like in other Austen novels, this story focuses on women and their relationships with other women. There are so many beautiful friendships in this book between Elizabeth and her sisters, especially Jane, for example, or with her Aunt Gardiner. Mr. Darcy is the perfect counterpart for Elizabeth because he too is clever and funny and quite selfish, but because he has money and because he is a man, he has the luxury to take action a lot more than she has. Okay, here comes a minor spoiler alert, so if you want to remain unspoiled, skip to this timestamp now. My favourite scene of the book is the infamous first proposal of Mr. Darcy to Elizabeth, in which he so misjudges and underestimates her that he completely misses the mark, and the scene ends in these glorious words of rejection from her. "I had not known you a month before I felt that you were the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry." Ouch. Pride and Prejudice is a wonderfully intricate story, with many plots and subplots woven so tightly together, but in such a subtle way that you don't even notice how everything is linked together until the end. Something people often don't realise before reading Pride and Prejudice is just how funny it is. There's the sharp wit of our main characters and a whole host of ridiculously over-the-top minor characters. There's the silliness of courtship and there's parodies of romantic sensibilities. This is such a clever, clever book, and to me it is perfection. It's a beautiful commentary on society, on love and family and money and gender and sin and redemption, and of course on Pride and on Prejudice. Book 2 on the list is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. There's this idea that you're either a Jane Eyre sort of person or a Wuthering Heights sort of person, and I am Team Jane all the way. This novel from 1847 is about a governess who takes up a new position in the home of a certain Mr. Rochester, a rude, controlling, horrible type of man with a dark, dark secret. Jane is great because she's so quiet and innocent, but at the same time she's very confident and takes control of her life in quite a dramatic way later in the book. Her relationship with Rochester is complicated and unhealthy, and it is about more than just love. The difference in power between them, based on his status and wealth, his position as her employer, and of course his gender, is given quite a lot of attention in the book. Jane, in a way, is a very archetypal Victorian heroine. She's good and moral, she's poor but educated, with a love of books and a desire to teach. At the same time, she is a rebel. She goes against her family, she goes against societal expectations, and she refuses to compromise. By the end of the book, the reader still isn't quite sure if she has done the right thing, if her decisions were correct, but she makes them with conviction, and that's what I find so attractive about her as a character. The novel is also very atmospheric and in a more subtle way than Wuthering Heights. Right from the beginning, there's this shadow over Jane, following her from her neglectful adopted family to the dreary workhouse-like boarding school to the dark and mysterious Thornfield Hall. This is a perfect read for a winter night, and I feel for Jane every time I read her story. The next book on my list is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This is from 1891. My love for this novel is completely unreasonable and totally irrational because objectively, it's not that good. The most striking part for me is always the opening scene in which the beautiful young Dorian Gray has his portrait taken by artist Basil Hallward, while his friend Lord Henry talks to them. Lord Henry is full of dark and twisted ideas of beauty and youth, and in that one scene he basically pulls Dorian over to the dark side. Dorian then goes on a self-destructive path through life, always with his friends Basil and Henry, but they can only watch as he sinks deeper and deeper into sin until it all comes back to haunt him. I always found it a bit baffling that the preface of the book contains this famous quote: "There is no such thing as a moral or immoral book. Books are well written or badly written, that is all." This is an interesting quote to put at the beginning of a book like Dorian Gray, because this is very moral, at least on the surface. Dorian goes off the rails and gets his punishment. But there is of course more to it than that, and that's why I find this novel so intriguing. Is this book a critique on moralist stories? Does it question the validity of these narratives, or is it satirizing them? Anyway, I said I wouldn't analyse in this video, so let's get back to the gushing for now. This was the first difficult novel that I read as a teenager. It was difficult because I read it in my second language. I read it with a dictionary by my side, and I learned a ton of vocabulary from this guy, Oscar Wilde. I also learned that I really love literature from the 19th century, so I owe you. Next up, we have The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle. This is hands down my favourite ever Sherlock Holmes story. This detective novel, set in the foggy Dartmoor countryside, is an incredibly fun and mysterious adventure that takes the famous detective Sherlock Holmes and his faithful companion Dr. Watson out of London in order to investigate a centuries-old curse. The book, like the majority of Sherlock Holmes stories, is narrated from Watson's point of view, and he is always a very emotional narrator. When he's impressed by one of Holmes's deductions, he's really impressed. When he's scared of the Hound, he's really scared. When he sees a pretty lady, well, let's just say he's very impressionable, but that makes him such a likeable and fun first-person narrator. This book has it all. There's the ancient tale of a hellhound haunting the moors. There's a naive American heir to an old family estate. There's romance and adventure and a touch of the supernatural. Dr. Watson's voice comes to life as the narrator of this mystery. Sherlock Holmes, the brilliant calculating detective genius, is a joy to read about, and this is just the best adventure ever, as he and Watson hide out in the misty darkness to catch the beast that has cost so many lives. It doesn't even matter if you know the solution to the mystery, because it's just as fun to read the second time or the third. There's not much depth to this book. There's no greater commentary on anything other than the mystery at hand. And yet, the puzzle, the adventure, the two main characters, and a whole host of suspects make it a very compelling little book. It's also a very short novel and doesn't ask much of the reader. The Hound of the Baskervilles, for me, stands head and shoulders above every other Sherlock Holmes story, and I return to this one over and over again. Next, I have to include my favourite ever children's classic in this list, and it is Pünktchen und Anton by Erich Kästner. This book was published in 1931 and the English title is Anna Louise and Anton. I am astounded that Kästner's children's books aren't more widely known in the English-speaking world, so you might not have heard of him at all. But if you have ever watched any version of The Parent Trap, then you are familiar with at least one of his works, because The Parent Trap is an adaptation of one of his later novels titled Das doppelte Lottchen. But now back to this one. I first came across this story in adaptation 2 when I saw it in my local cinema as a child. I just looked it up and the film came out in 1999, so I was 8 when I saw it. Pretty much straight after, I demanded to read the book, so I got this one. This is the story of two children from very different circumstances and their friendship. Pünktchen is the daughter of a rich factory owner. Anton, on the other hand, lives with his single mum who has health issues, so he has to work and make money for the two of them. This is set against the backdrop of a post-World War I Berlin, and it was the first book I ever read that touched on so many more issues than just friendship and adventure. It discusses wealth, society, honesty and honour, class and culture, and many more things. This was one of the books the Nazis feared so much they set it on fire in the book burnings of 1933. This little book has power. Between the chapters of the book, there are these little pages of commentary from the author directed at the young reader, in which he discusses what just happened in the previous chapter. It's like the director's commentary woven directly into the book. When I read this as a child, I remember thinking that is how adults talk to each other. And to this day, this is one of my favourite things about Kästner's works. Despite the child-friendly tone, they don't patronise the reader, they don't shy away from difficult issues, and that's why I love this story to this day. We're getting towards the end of this list, and the next book on it is also a children's classic. I'm talking about the St Clare Series by Enid Blyton. This is a series of 6 novels published between 1941 and 1945, following the pupils at a girls' boarding school in the English countryside. These books were huge in Germany, but funnily enough, the translation from the 1960s both modernised and Germanised the stories, so I've only read the English original novels once when my mother-in-law lent them to me. This here is one of the German editions translated as Honey und Nanny. I loved these books growing up. Like every German girl reading these, I really wanted to go to boarding school. I wanted to take part in the lessons. I wanted to play pranks on the teachers and organise midnight parties by the pool. this series is representative of a whole genre of boarding school stories about girls and aimed at girls. And it was my first real experience of reading a book with practically no male characters. There is a proper little society going on among these girls, and decisions are made together. There is organisation and communication, and I think this taught me a lot about how to get stuff done without adults and without interfering boys. There's not much more to these stories. They are about friendship and adventure, but with a very heavy mid-century morality centred around an ideal girlhood. In every book we encounter rebels who do not conform to the standard, and by the end they have usually learned their lesson, subdued and found their place in society. The values perpetuated in the St Clare's books are more than outdated, but that's never stopped me from indulging in these stories and loving them just for what they are. And now for the last book in today's video. This is Maurice by E.M. Forster. This was published in 1971 after Forster's death, but it was written around 1913. This was another novel I picked up as a teenager and randomly found it in the 50-cent bin at the local charity shop. This was after I'd read Dorian Gray and I was on the lookout for more English language classics, so I grabbed anything that looked old. And that's how I came to read the story of a gay man trying to find his place in a very repressed Edwardian England. At the very core of this, it is a love story. Boy meets boy, gets his heart broken, tries to recover, but the setting of time and place make this a very special novel. Maurice, the main character, is an educated and wealthy man, but still a working man, whereas Clive, the man he falls in love with at university, is a member of the upper classes. Clive is restricted and bound by his position in society, while Maurice, as a representative of the middle classes, struggles to find his place in the world. Forster links the breaking free of heteronormative standards to the breaking free of the British class system in a really striking way. This is a theme, as I later learned, in his other novels too, but in Maurice it's possibly written in the most powerful and overt way. When I read this as a teenager though, I didn't catch any of those subtexts. I really liked it as a romance and as a story of high society. Maurice is a compelling main character. He is flawed and unlikable in parts, but by the end you really root for him and hope that everything works out well. The book is also very funny in a subtle Jane Austen-esque way, and I always saw Forster as the natural progression to the gentle satire of the gentry that Austen wrote a century before he did. And so we come full circle in this list of my all-time favourite classic novels. I'm not going to give a long conclusion because wow, is this video long already? But I would like to know if you have read any of these and if you enjoyed them as much as I did, or if you didn't like them at all. And what are your all-time favourite classics, the books that you turn to over and over again? Please let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed this video, I would like to bring your attention to some previous videos that discuss some of the works that I've talked about. All of these are linked in the description box. I did a video discussing the genre of boarding school novels earlier this year, and I also listed my least favourite classics in a separate video. And if you're watching this in the future, you will also find links to a video about where to start with Oscar Wilde and another one about where to start with Sherlock Holmes. But if you are an early bird seeing this on the 3rd of October, you'll have to wait for those, I'm afraid. Something to look forward to. Thank you for watching. Bye!